International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael Grossi is on his way to Japan. He'll deliver a safety report on Tokyo's plan to release water from the Fukushima nuclear plant into the sea. Japan intends to discharge treated water is raising alarms in neighbouring countries like South Korea and China. The plan is also opposed by Japanese fishermen. Jack Barton reports from Fukushima.
This Fukushima fishing fleet is still only allowed to leave port 3 days a week. Crews here still depend on government subsidies to survive. At the local auction house, sales are slowly picking up, so people worry about the release of contaminated water used to cool tsunami-crippled reactors at the nearby nuclear power station.
I think there will be an effect on sales. As for the people who get the most upset about it, that's the fishermen.
Nationwide, people appear to be split. A recent Japan News Network poll showed that 45% of people support the release of the contaminated water, with 40% opposing the plan. But it's a very different story here in Fukushima Prefecture.
I'm completely against it. They're definitely going to do it. I'm really angry about it, but I have to obey the country's decision.
People here are generally resigned to the release, but are calling for greater clarity.
If we don't know of any other solution and have decided to release the water into the sea, that really requires a clear explanation to the public. Then the public really has to be reassured that it is safe to eat.
This fisherman tells me opposition to the release is widespread.
Yes, of course it's unpopular and that's damaging.
Though he personally thinks the water and the local fish are safe.
So yes, it's difficult. Even if we think it's safe, there's something that can give us anxiety. But as for me, I eat it and haven't been hurt by it.
The government still hasn't announced when the contaminated water will be released. The expectation is it will be sometime after this week's visit to Japan by the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog. Jack Barton, CGTN, Fukushima.
For more on the planned release of water from the Fukushima plant, we're joined now by Jim Smith, Professor of Environmental Science, University of Portsmouth. Thanks very much for joining us, Jim. Now, this is a contentious plan, angering environmentalists, as we just heard, and of course fishermen, souring ties also with neighbours like China and South Korea. How unusual is a practice like this?
Well, it's not unusual at all. I understand why the fishermen are concerned about it, because they know that probably the negative media coverage over this will impact on their sales of fish. But actually this happens all over the world. So for example, in the Le Hague site in France is discharging about 450 times more tritiated water, radioactive water, into the English Channel every year than the Fukushima release will discharge. This happens all over the world. It happens in the US, it happens in the UK, it happens in China and South Korea, who discharge more tritiated water into the Pacific Ocean than this Fukushima release will discharge. But it's understandable, given the fears and the memories of the terrible disaster at Fukushima. It's understandable that people are concerned.
So can you explain to us, some of the chemicals in this water, how it's deposited in the water, over what length of time, and if at all there are any potential environmental impacts that could be in the sea short-term or long-term?
These wastewaters at any nuclear site in the world are treated before they're released. So that means that radionuclides like radioactive cesium or radioactive strontium that we might have heard about at the time of the Fukushima accident, they're removed by the treatment process, and they're really at very, very low levels, less than 1% of the Japanese allowable limit for releases, so they're really not of concern. But tritiated water is just, chemically, it behaves just like ordinary water. So it's H2O, as we know ordinary water, but one of the hydrogens is replaced by the radioactive form of hydrogen, which is tritium. And that makes it incredibly difficult and in fact, pretty much impossible at this scale to separate the radioactive tritiated water from the normal water. Now, the good news is that tritiated water isn't really very radiotoxic. So it's tritium's one of the least radiotoxic elements. And at the same time, because it's diluted by so much normal water, it doesn't biomagnify up the food chain. So there have been various assessments done, not just by the International Atomic Energy Agency, but by independent researchers. And they found that the radiation doses to people in the environment will really be vanishingly small, much less than the natural radiation doses we see around the world.
So reports in South Korea say that the demand for sea salt has skyrocketed because consumers are taking it off the shelves, worried that it won't be sticking around for long. We heard stories about the fishermen in local parts of Japan. But why is China and South Korea so angered by this move if you say it's actually not a risk?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I think there's probably some political discussions going on that I'm not party to. I'm not a politician, but certainly the science says that this is a routine release. It'll happen over 30 years at really very low levels. And the science says there's nothing to be worried about for the Pacific Ocean or for consumers. I've studied the Chernobyl accident for a long time, and we've looked at lakes around the Chernobyl nuclear site, which are thousands of times more radioactively contaminated than the Pacific Ocean will be. And we really find it very hard to see even subtle effects of radiation on the aquatic ecosystem. The ecosystems around Chernobyl are thriving despite the high radiation levels. So these are not of concern, but understandably because of the misunderstanding of the science, and I think some misinformation from anti-nuclear pressure groups, I think that leads people to be concerned about the release when really they shouldn't be.
All right, really great to get your insight. Jim Smith, Professor of Environmental Science at the University of Portsmouth. Thank you.